thank you very much for your kind invitation to this important conference. Ladies and gentlemen, when Germany assumed the presidency of the European Council at the beginning of 2007, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel gave a speech to the European Parliament focusing on the question, what holds Europe together in its innermost being? What defines the European Union? We have to find Europe's soul. Angela Merkel thought to have found the value that unites European diversity in peace. She said it's tolerance. That quality is tolerance. Europe's soul is tolerance. Europe is the continent of tolerance. But is that really it? To practice tolerance? Merkel's response confirms the insight that the term smacks of the arbitrary, indefinite, and decorative. According to Merkel, tolerance is the quality that leads to freedom in responsibility for others. Tolerance, she said, tolerance is a demanding virtue. It requires the involvement of both heart and mind. It requires something of us. Yet by no means, she said, it must be confused with arbitrariness and sitting on the fence. And what is more, tolerance as we need it in Europe does not merely mean refraining from violence, does not simply mean putting up with otherness, but actively welcoming it. End of quote. But how can I want one thing and the complete opposite of it at the same time? At least I won't be allowed to want the evil. And so Merkel formulates, following insofar Thomas Mann, I quote, tolerance becomes a crime when applied to evil. Thus, Merkel finally arrives at the formula summarizing her interpretation of tolerance. I quote, tolerance without acceptance of intolerance is what makes us human. End of quotation. The listener and reader remains somewhat perplexed. He is inclined to ask, what is this obscure value called tolerance that can become a crime? Ladies and gentlemen, the vagueness, in fact arbitrariness of this term does not prevent, but rather promote it. That tolerance, in the meantime, indeed became a fundamental value of the European Union. Tolerance stands alongside pluralism, non-discrimination, justice, solidarity, and equality between women and men. However, as politically correct as this may be, it misses the decisive factor. A good 60 years ago, Germany, Europe, as well as the still ideologically European-dominated international community of states knew what united them despite all differences of political views and opinions. It was the unshakable belief in human dignity as the basis of indispensable pre-state, so to speak, natural human rights. No, not wanting one and at the same time the other is the essence of a civilized European legal culture, but recognizing the other in his otherness as having equal dignity and therefore respecting and protecting his elementary rights and legal interests. In fact, the return to the idea of human dignity after the end of World War II was a common European good. In a political resolution at its Congress in The Hague in May 1948, the European unity movement had already demanded that the soon-to-be-founded European Union or Federation should have a Charter of Human Rights. The Charter should set as it was said, the standards to which a state must conform if it is to deserve the name of a democracy. There was a firm belief that regardless of national, ideological, and religious differences, the true unity of Europe lay in the common heritage of Christian and other spiritual and cultural values, as well as the common loyalty to human fundamental rights. When in 1949 the Council of Europe embarked on its statutory mission to preserve and develop human rights and fundamental freedoms, and set up about developing a collective, legally binding guarantee of human rights at the European level, the Parliamentary Assembly held a fundamental debate in September 1949. This quickly led to the communis opinio that the fundamental human rights were part of Europe's common cultural heritage, its very foundations. Europe was less conceived as a geographical, geopolitical, or strategic concept than a Europe with a common spiritual basis in its views on man, his dignity, and his rights. They summoned the genius of Europe. So, in the debate, it was asked, is not the belief in the existence of human rights the real greatness of Western civilization, of European culture? What, in fact, does European civilization stand for in our eyes? Quite simply, it's the dignity of the human being, the conviction shared by us all that every man is worthy of respect, that every man has the right to live in safety and dignity, that no man can be subject to indifference to us, however weak or however near to death he may be. End of quotation. From this, it is evident that originally the basis on which a common Europe should be built was less the idea of a common market, but above all the belief in human rights based on the inviolable dignity of man. The planned instrument of a European Convention on Human Rights with a judicial enforcement mechanism was accordingly understood as an integral part of the European integration project. While today we are accustomed to differentiating the Human Rights Convention system from European law in the narrow sense, this was not the original intention. From this point of view, the integration of the Convention law standards into the law of the European Union can be legitimately described as a late realization of original integration goals. The Convention on Human Rights makes no explicit reference to human dignity, but without any doubt it includes its guarantees. In the preamble, the Convention states reaffirm their profound belief in those fundamental freedoms which are the foundation of justice and peace in the world and are best maintained on the one hand by an effective political democracy and on the other by a common understanding and observance of the human rights upon which they depend. The fact that these freedoms and these fundamental human rights themselves are based on the assumed dignity of the human being is shown by the debate of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, from which I have quoted. In addition, this is also indirectly reflected in the paragraph of the preamble in which I quote, "a common heritage of political traditions, ideals, freedoms, and the rule of law," end of quotation, possessed by the Convention states is invoked. Ladies and gentlemen, even the community, the international community of states, organized in the United Nations, but still dominated by the European and Atlantic states, declared in 1945 in the United Nations Charter its faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. It was precisely for this reason that the community of states committed itself to the goal of promoting universal respect and realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction of race, sex, language, or religion. Adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations in fulfillment of their mandate to promote human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was first postulated as a non-binding ideal under international law, reaffirms the common conviction that the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. This formulation may have inspired the creed of the German people in Article 2, paragraph 2 of the German Basic Law. I quote, "The German people therefore, namely for the sake of human dignity, acknowledges inviolable and inalienable human rights as the basis of every community, peace and justice in the world." Ladies and gentlemen, what does human dignity mean in a legal sense? By declaring human dignity inviolable, that means untouchable, the noli me tangere has been elevated to the principles of law, and man has been declared a sacred district. To invade it became a sacrilege. With the dignity granted to him, man is elevated into the fear of the sacred and the sacrosanct. Therefore, the protection of autonomy is not the core of the human dignity guarantee, as many currently mean by mistake. Rather, it is the personal identity, as well as the necessary physical and psychological integrity of the individual human being. The guarantee of human dignity makes them the Archimedean point of the legal system. The inviolable human dignity, human dignity now occupies, one might say, the void of the sacred and unavailable in a world which is aligned by imminence and contingency. Having dignity, therefore, firstly means to be a legal subject. Every human being is a recognized person. Consequently, the life of a human being is not at the state's disposal. If the state demands something from a human being, he is to address him as a person being held accountable. The state must be able to justify legal obligations to the person to whom it imposes duties. Secondly, having dignity means never being without rights. Everyone brings a certain minimum of rights into the state legal system. This legal system has to ensure that these pre-state rights are protected and can endow everyone with further rights, but the state cannot deprive him of these minimum rights. Contrary, everyone can be burdened with obligations only to the extent that this minimum of rights permits. In a nutshell, from a legal perspective, no human being starts from scratch. No human being must hope to be granted any rights according to his or her level of worthiness from a legal system made by man. Everybody brings along a basic stock of inviolable and inalienable human rights, as basic equipment, so to speak. And simply because he is human, only because he is human. And he keeps those rights, whatever he does wrong. It is utterly impossible for the state to exclude human beings from the circle of human rights and thus deprive them of the owed respect and protection. In 1949, Hannah Arendt describes in a very impressive manner what it means to be excluded from the legal community as a human being, what it means to be without rights, and that there is such a thing as a right to have rights. I quote, "The misfortune of the rightless is not that they are deprived of their life, freedom, pursuit of happiness, equality before law, or freedom of opinion. Their misfortune cannot be covered by any of those formulas designed to solve problems within given communities. Their lawlessness arises solely from the fact that they no longer belong to any kind of community. Even the Nazis robbed the Jews of their legal status, at this time the status of second-class citizenship, squeezed them into ghettos and concentration camps, cut them off from the world of the living before they began their extermination. Thus, and this is crucial, a situation of complete lawlessness was established before the right to life was called into question. The existence of such a category of people holds danger. It could happen that we are no longer fully aware of the fact that a person has been murdered if he has practically ceased to exist before." End of quotation. Hannah Arendt knew what she was talking about. She had witnessed and suffered the deprivation of rights of the Jews in National Socialist Germany prior to their murder. In order to prevent any repetition of such a development in the future, the fathers and mothers of the German Constitution of 1949 declared the human dignity in Article 1, Paragraph 1 of German Basic Law to be untouchable, that means sacrosanct. In this point, they were, as I have demonstrated, in complete agreement with the new guiding idea of European legal culture in the second half of the 20th century. The recognition of human dignity in the basic law of the Federal Republic of Germany was therefore something like Germany's normative return to Europe. In short, to be a recognized legal subject endowed with inalienable minimum of rights, that is precisely what constitutes human dignity in a legal sense. The right to life, the right to physical integrity, the fundamental legal right to freedom and equal treatment are part of this core set of rights. Dignity is not considered as an award earned through achievement, like a special rank, but as a promise of legal personality, especially in the state of imperfection and weakness. The image of humanity on which the guarantee of human dignity is based is that of a legal subject whose dignity must be protected in the state community, regardless of its capacity for self-determination. Therefore, the attribution of dignity protects the individual in his natural freedom, but also in his imperfection. Dignity itself cannot be taken from any human being as it is something unavailable, but the right to respect and protection that results from it is vulnerable. This respect and protection of basic rights by the state is especially important for those people who are not yet, or no longer, because of their state of development, their mental health, or other circumstances, no longer in a position to assert rights for themselves to which they are entitled as human beings. So one might say the guarantee of human dignity highlights that even their fate, the fate of these people, must not be arbitrarily determined by other people without regard to their legal status as a person. So human dignity marks a taboo in a liberal state. Ladies and gentlemen, not only, but also and especially in the bioethical debate, it has become clear that this taboo limit is in danger of becoming permeable and thus worthless. A tacit agreement no longer exists. We can no longer be sure that we all mean the same thing when we talk about human dignity. Yes, it is true that the legal value of human dignity has found its way into the primary law of the European Union. In Article 2, Sentence 1 of the Treaty of the European Union, and especially in Article 1 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. But do they really mean the same thing? Doubts are justified. During the consultations in the Convention of Fundamental Rights, the decisive question of what constitutes the content of the legal concept of human dignity, or rather on which European intellectual, spiritual, historical basis the term should be founded, was ignored and thus left for future practice. According to the preamble of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, the people of Europe, conscious of their spiritual, religious and moral heritage, wants to rest the Union on the indivisible and universal values of human dignity, freedom, equality and solidarity. But what is really about this consciousness? Does Europe not suffer from a dramatic unconsciousness in this respect? In order to remedy this situation, Europe urgently needs to return to its spiritual foundations. The belief in human dignity that shapes the legal culture and thus the identity of Europe cannot be separated from Christianity with its Imago Dei doctrine. It is no coincidence that the idea of human rights based on human dignity has developed in the cultural space of Christianity and finally was politically and legally enforced here and nowhere else. Therefore, I would like to end with a warning of John Paul II, which must therefore be heeded. I quote, "If the religious and Christian foundation of this continent should be marginalized in its function as an inspiring source of ethics and in its social effectiveness, then not only the entire heritage of Europe's past would be denied, but even more a future of European people. Moreover, every European, religious or unbelieving, would be seriously endangered." End of quote. Thank you for your attention.